It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412, the first episode in 2025. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host, Smitty. What is going on, man? We have not recorded in, it's almost been a month. It's actually been
nearly a month.
It's been like 30-ish days, like since we actually recorded and then the episode came out. So it's pretty much been a month, and it's pretty wild that we took that kind of hiatus, but things worked out. We kind of touched on it a little bit on Steelers Saturday Sit Down. We had that prior to the playoff game against the Ravens, but we mentioned that just with the holidays, and I had a kid, so I had a bunch of family in town over the holidays as well. The way the dates lined up for those holidays just didn't really work out for us to record. Then it just so happened that we just, I guess, got in the habit of not recording it, and the playoffs happened, and now we're here. But it's a month removed from our last Steelers episode, and I thought, what a better way to introduce this episode than reading the title of our last Steelers episode. I don't even know if you remember what it is.
I just looked at it.
Will Steelers dominance over Ravens continue? Around the 412 Steelers
and that,
show.
By the way, nothing to do with the playoff game that they played, because you said,
that was against the first time, because the last Steelers podcast we put out was after they played the Philadelphia Eagles. So we didn't talk about the Ravens game, Chiefs game, Bengals, Ravens playoffs. Like, we have all of that we have soaked in. The season's officially over, and now we get to talk about the aftermath of what seems like a nuclear war, at least among Steeler fans, of this Steelers season and the way that it finished out, losing 5 games in a row.
Yeah, like you said, it wasn't necessarily the plan to not record a podcast for a month. It was the 19th of December that last Steelers podcast went up. Now, we did do a Steelers Saturday sit down where we recapped some stuff and then looked ahead to that playoff matchup against the Ravens. But in terms of that, like, that wasn't the plan by any means, but what it has done, man, is given us a lot of things that we can talk about on this episode, and not small picture stuff, like big picture outlook stuff, kind of going back over the season and then what needs to happen in 2025, 2026. So with that being said, obviously the hot button topic is going to be Mike Tomlin. I mean, especially because of the way that they ended the season this year. You look at the way that things have gone in the playoffs in general as of late. And I say as of late, but we're looking at a pretty long stretch now. So I don't even know if as of late is the correct terminology to use there. But even like last year, right? I know they end last season on a 3-game win streak, but, not pressing the right buttons at the quarterback position, waiting way too long to go to Mason Rudolph, instead of Mitch Trubisky. They've had a 3-game losing streak at some point every season for the last 5 years, something like that, 4 years, something like that.
Yeah.
I think 21, 2, 3, and 4. They've had at least 3-game losing streak every season with it. No, 20 they did for sure as well.
20 they did.
They fell apart. Yeah. If they did in 20, then it's 5 years in a row. They've had.
If they did it in 2019, that's an even bigger surprise.
Yeah. All right. Well, either way, 3-game losing streaks have become a trend here for this team. So I think the Mike Tomlin conversation is probably where we should start with this. Now, with the caveat being that I don't necessarily want to spend a whole bunch of time on this, just because regardless of what we already know the direction the franchise is going, the organization is going. Mike Tomlin is going to stay in his spot moving forward. But last season, we had a conversation on here after that 3-game losing streak, maybe even after the first 2, where it was Arizona and New England, where they lost 2 back-to-back games at home against 2-win teams, where we're like, this isn't an indictment necessarily of what Mike Tomlin is as a football coach, but sometimes things just get stale, and it's best to go their separate ways. We've had the same conversation regarding Mike Sullivan and the Penguins. Maybe it's best that the organization and the coaches go separate ways. Where are you at with Mike Tomlin present day in terms of his role as the head coach of this team?
See, I'm happy you mentioned the conversations we've had about how similar the situation is growing to be, in my opinion, between the Penguins and the Steelers in their head coaching job. I feel like Mike Tomlin, and I've had this conversation with a few people since the season has ended, discussing my thoughts on Tomlin and hearing what the other people have to say. And I feel like there's not a more polarizing figure in Pittsburgh sports right now than Mike Tomlin. And it's always the debate of how much of a role, as far as some of the decisions being made in the organization, does Tomlin have his hand on, which you never know necessarily for certain. The in-game coaching decisions, which we have a better idea of how much of an impact does that have on the wins and losses that they've had. And then also the one, the devil's advocate that everybody loves to bring up is if you get rid of him, who you're bringing in. Because I don't love that, but I also do have the opinion, and I've kind of grown that opinion over the past week, where I think that if you're looking at just in general, not necessarily for every single team, but in general, for the most part, quarterback is more important than head coach. And so I think that whenever you're looking at the head coaching job and look at what Tomlin has done, you also have to look at the quarterback position. And in my opinion, I don't think that you can – it's almost like you have to grade him on a curve a little bit because of what he's been able to do with the quarterback play he's gotten. And I am now in the camp of, like, should they move on from Mike Tomlin? There's part of me that says I think they should, because at what point does it become stagnant? At what point does it become stale? And like the Penguins, you're doing the same thing over again. And insanity, the definition of it, people who love to bring up, is like doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. We haven't gotten a different result in years with Tomlin, just like we haven't with the Penguins right now. And so from that standpoint, I get it. But at the same time, I don't necessarily know that you're going to bring in somebody that's going to be able to push the right buttons with the current roster that they have and be able to make this team better from day one, which is why I said, and this opinion of mine has been growing, and maybe you agree or disagree or can add what you think about this. In my opinion right now for 2025, and I know the Steelers are not moving on from Tomlin. If you were to move on from Tomlin, that would only be to get worse as a team so you can get better in the future. That's how I would view it. I feel like the floor for Tomlin is pretty safe. And you know what that floor is. The ceiling for Tomlin is the thing that is in question for everybody right now. But I feel like if you're getting rid of Tomlin and bringing in somebody else, that to me would be the sole reason you are going for a better quarterback, which is why I mentioned the quarterback position being more important than the head coach. Because I just feel like Tomlin himself brings the floor up for the team. I don't know how high the ceiling is anymore, but I don't think you're going to bottom out with Tomlin as the coach.
Yeah, the old going before you can go forward mindset. Alan and I have had a lot of conversations over the last, but basically since the season ended, regarding tanking and, stuff and why it's just not feasible to do, especially like teams don't even really seeing a bad team doesn't necessarily mean they're tanking. Like, how many cases of actually tanking do you even see within the NFL? I can't remember a legit situation where I was like, yes, that team is tanking, since Andrew Luck, those Colts, when they were moving on. There's been bad teams, no doubt, but even the Bengals before getting Burrow, like, they originally benched Andy Dalton for his play. They ended up going back to him at the end of the season anyway. Like, they were still trying to win games in that team and try to improve their roster and free agency before that season. Like, there's just not a lot of cases of that happening. But I think with Tomlin, to your point about like what he does, obviously for the floor, what he does for the ceiling, like we've had those conversations. My biggest issue with Tomlin isn't like on game days. Like, it's about what his hand is in with the roster more than anything else, because I don't think that the roster construction really since like late era Kevin Colbert has been going in the right direction. I've always said that I would reserve judgment on Mike Tomlin until we got another franchise quarterback, because of what you're saying, where the quarterback is so important to defining how a coach is looked at. But you got to be going in the right direction. And I'm not so sure that the Steelers are right now. And I'm not so sure that I trust him to be the guy in place to finding the next quarterback, just because of, like, I know that it seems like they're kind of always on this weird timeline. Like, they've needed quarterbacks at the wrong time. They needed a quarterback in the Kenny Pickett draft year where it just wasn't a very good class. Now you could argue that they would need one right now. Again, not a very good draft class. But even like the in-season management of the quarterbacks, and that's why I brought that up before, I'm not saying that he's a world beater, but clearly Mason Rudolph was a better option than Mitch Trubisky. And it took 3 games for them to realize that in season. And who knows how differently that could have been. They wouldn't have made noise, obviously, in the postseason or anything like that. But those are the types of things that give me a little bit of pause in terms of wanting to go forward with Mike Tomlin, because I question his ability to find a solution at the most important position. That on top of the coordinator hires, obviously, we know that Art Rooney's pockets are really going to have an influence there as well. But we don't know the exact numbers. I would be like, Art Smith's got to be well compensated amongst offensive coordinators. It would surprise me if he's not. So they were willing to pay up, whatever word you want to use, for this last offensive coordinator. You would think that could have maybe expanded the parameters in terms of who they were looking for, in terms of the quality. Arthur Smith is by and far the best coordinator hire that they've made, and it's a very average one. So that's saying a lot. So I think it definitely because that's the thing. We're talking about Artie Smith. He's getting, Steelers fans would not be upset if he got one of these 2 head coaching opportunities. It doesn't seem like on the surface a lot of the fan base would be upset if he got the Jets or Bears head coaching jobs. For me, I'm concerned about who the next guy hired would be because of what recent history says about their coordinator hires. I don't know where you are with that. And then the last thing that I want to say before I turn it back to you is, in terms of the organization above Mike Tomlin, kind of that same line of thinking. I'm not saying don't fire Tomlin because you don't know what the next guy's doing. I hate that mindset, to be quite honest with you. I hate when that's said, who you're going to hire. However, I think it is pretty valid to question if the Steelers would approach their next head coaching search the right way. They've only hired 3 in 50 plus years. We have no clue what their approach would be, but based off their track record, defensive-minded, I question, if they were part of this head coaching search, and I'm not saying he's going to be a bad hire, I think Aaron Glenn would be the guy before Ben Johnson would be the guy. I don't know where you're at with that. I think that they're going to continue going this trend. Philosophically, it makes the most sense. And again, Aaron Glenn could be a great head coaching hire. I'm not sure, but it really makes the importance of who you get at OC even more important. Really heightens the importance there. And whether it's Tomlin, whether it's another defensive-minded head coach, whether because of even things above Tomlin, these are the things that I'm questioning. So it's not about what they're doing on game days or anything like that, the in-game coaching. Because I'll be honest, based off looking at the roster, 10 wins for this roster is overachieving. He's overachieving to me from an actual coaching perspective, but it's his hand and everything else going on with the organization why I lean, if it were my call, moving on.
Yeah, I agree with you that I think that Tomlin's problem right now is having his hand in a little bit of everything. And for me, looking at a great example of this is changing their game plan against the Bengals. Yeah. And
that's crazy.
I, as a defensive-minded
isn't that the whole
coach,
point that you bring in a guy like Artie Smith so you don't?
I do not think a former head coach,
yeah.
Arthur Smith. I do not think that as a defensive-minded head coach, you should have any hand in the offense. You should trust your guys that you brought in, the former head coach that you brought in, and former head coach, but he was even better OC whenever he was in Tennessee. Trust him to run the offense. Trust him to make those calls. You don't need your hand in it when you're a defensive-minded coach. If you, at a certain point, want to take away the defensive responsibilities in a game or for a stretch of games from Terrell Austin because he's not performing well, that's one thing. But the offense is something that's not your side of the ball. I don't understand why you should think that you should change the game plan. I feel like head coaches, and this isn't just for Tomlin, this is in general in the NFL, college football, I mean, even down to high school football, realistically, I feel like head coaches need to leave their coordinators alone to be able to run their sides of the ball. And if they need to step in for one thing or another, that's different. But him having a hand in the offensive decision of what they were doing against the Bengals a few weeks ago, that to me is just inexcusable. I don't think that should have happened. And you look at the success they had against the Bengals earlier in the year. What happened in the second time around? They ended up losing, and we find out after the fact that the offensive game plan was totally different. That's something that I think that is a problem with Tomlin. And I've always said, like, as a coach himself, I think he's a great motivator of men. I think that he gets the most out of his players that play for him. So that's never been an issue for me. It's just everything else that you have to do with the organization, as far as what you mentioned too, the drafting goes. Like, is he the guy that we can trust to be able to get that next franchise quarterback? He's only drafted one quarterback in the first round, which was Kenny Pickett. And look how that turned out, which all credit to him too. Like, it wasn't a great draft class. They were kind of forced into a situation where they needed to take a quarterback. But similar situation this year. And so, I mean, I don't think they're going to take a quarterback draft in this year's draft, but Tomlin just has to minimize what his impact is on the team, in my opinion, for him to really kind of change his narrative in Pittsburgh, because we all know he's going to be here. But if people want to change their tune on Tomlin, he needs to be less hands-on with his coordinators. He needs to be less hands-on with the draft and just be the head coach. I feel like you need to leave the drafting up to Omar and Andy Weidel. You need to leave the coaching, as far as the coordinator and game plans go, up to your coordinators. Now, whether your coordinators are up to snuff, speaking of really one side of the ball and looking at the defensive side of the ball, that's a different conversation. And you might be able to change one of those coordinators if you need to. But as far as the guys you bring in, just let them do their thing. I feel like that is not the head coach's responsibility, and that's a problem.
Let's talk about something that is feasible then. You mentioned Terrell Austin, the defensive coordinator, if we could see a change there. You look at guys within that defense, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, namely, who were just complete ghosts the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, really. Minkah did have an interception against the Ravens in that second matchup, but very not noticeable. TJ Watt didn't have a sack in the last 4 games of the season, if you include the playoff game. I mean, these are guys that, when you think about their names, the name recognition around the league, you think game changers. What's going on, everybody? Smitty from Around the 412, and I just want to take a quick second to give a shout out to our folks at Game Changers. Their logo on the screen right now, right above my microphone. Over 2,000 different designs in their catalog. Luxury heavyweight material. I am wearing one of their shirts right now. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Head over to gamechanger.la or pick6.la to pick up some shirts. And guess what? Use code AT412. Save yourself $10 on your order every single time. Again, gamechanger.la or pick6.la. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Check them out. Not related to Pittsburgh sports, but I'm absolutely fired up. They got a new line over there of WWE shirts. Oh man, they're so fire, because they've been putting out a lot of different designs now that are just like the big face ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're getting me. My bank account, especially, not the best time for me to be spending money with, me trying to finish up the closing of this house and everything like that and get that across the finish line. Game Changers is killing me. But anyway, go save $10.
It's been a month since we recorded.
Yeah, lots happened.
The subtle flexes remain the same from Smitty.
I just realized that wasn't a thing.
He's a season ticket holder. He's getting close to closing on a house after the season ends. I mean, this is something that has to be studied about the subtle flexes that Smitty proclaims on these shows. 2 or 3 more episodes in this basement before we move. We will be in a new place, I assume. There's a lot of things that we could talk about the Steelers. But next week's episode will be interesting because on Monday I'm going to dinner with Pat, so we'll be able to talk about. I had to do that after you saying that. But anyways, we left off the conversation right before. I don't know if you know this, but I'm kind of a big deal. Right before I played that ad, we were talking about the defensive side of the ball, and I don't want to place blame solely on Terrell Austin for those guys just being ghosts at the end of the season. Because guys like Cam Hayward, was consistent throughout. Sure. Deshaun Elliott had a career year on the back end. But I can't figure out exactly what. And if you look at when Terrell Austin became the defensive coordinator, I think the biggest thing to me is they haven't had, except for 1 year, Flores was in here and helped them get creative up front because he has the front 7 background. But they typically have not employed, and this goes back to the staff, and not having a big enough staff, not enough spending within it. They haven't had a front 7 defensive assistant added to that. And I think that Terrell Austin could be fine in his role if you gave him a little bit more help with a guy that could bring that balance and bring that fresh mindset. Because the 3 years that Terrell Austin has been the defensive coordinator, this team has had 47 or less sacks. Prior to that, from 2007 to 2021,
every year of TJ Watt's career, from his rookie year to the year that he led the league in sacks, they had 52 plus. And then they've been on a downswing each of the last 3 years. So something's up there. And I'm not saying that it's solely on Terrell Austin. I don't think it's solely on the players either. I think it's a combination of both. TJ's been outspoken about feeling like he's got to move around the formation more and be more open to it and stuff like that, and learn, how to deal better with chips and double teams and triple teams and how much attention he gets. That's something, point of emphasis for him, if you will, this offseason. But that to me is a change that could take place. I don't know what his contract situation is. I guess the question is to you, is that a change that you would make? Or would you rather see them, just like I said, add a senior defensive assistant with a front seven background, but still keep TA just because of the work that he does with DBs?
I mean, it's a tough question to answer for me, because I feel like this would be easier if I knew if he was under contract next year or not. Because we don't really know when the
so I'm not saying this is with 100% certainty. We thought that he wasn't, like, between people that I had talked to. However, Ray Fittipaldo was on 93.7 today, and I saw Pony put out a tweet that he is under contract for 2025. So I honestly, I don't know. It's interesting to me case, how.
Then go ahead.
I was just say I get why, because it's not like they don't have to adhere to a salary cap. But it's just, it's so annoying that coaches' contracts aren't just like out there for public information to know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is annoying, and it makes this conversation a little tougher. But if he is in fact going to be around in 2025, it's almost like the Tomlin conversation. It's like not even worth having, because I just don't think the Steelers are going to fire him.
They're
not going to relieve him from his duties and find somebody else. And to be completely honest with you, I don't even know if I would trust them to make that decision and bring in somebody good, because do you know the last time, and I'll credit, like, they haven't had a ton of defensive coordinators in our lifetime, but like, do you know the last time that they hired a defensive coordinator that was not in the organization already?
No.
In 1997, they hired Jim Haslett as the defensive coordinator. He was defensive coordinator for a couple years before Tim Lewis took over. And he is the last hire at defensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers that was not in the organization already. I'm not saying that your hires have to come from out of the organization all the time, but we've seen in recent history, especially, the Steelers just love to hire from within. And I have my own reasons as to why for that. A lot of them have to do with the owner, but I just don't know that I necessarily trust the Steelers to make a smart and well thought out decision at defensive coordinator if history shows me that they're just going to hire somebody from within. So with that being said, I would hire a senior defensive analyst to help out. I think they need to do something with the defense, because I know this is a lot more. There's a lot more to this than this thought process that I'm about to lay out. But if you look at the personnel on the defense and you look at the skill level that they have and how they've played in their careers, and then you look at the defensive coordinator and what he's done with the defense, which of the two, if the defense is not performing up to the probability, do you think would be more of the problem? To me, if the defensive players that have shown how good they are and they're not playing up to it, that would lean more on the defensive coordinator with his scheming. But like I said, that's very generalized. That's not an actual thing, but it's kind of like a dummy way of thinking about that. And so I think they do need to do something to improve the defense. The front seven, like you said, especially. I thought the secondary actually had a really good year overall, and I like what I saw from them. The front seven, though, at times it's very vanilla and very boring. Like you mentioned, like Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt, they don't move around. They don't shift sides to sides. TJ especially has not moved. I have not seen him move in years. And I feel like to get the most out of him at this point in his career, you're going to have to be more creative than that.
Well, okay, so the one thing that I'll say is I got to take some blame off of Terrell Austin for that, just because TJ hasn't wanted to. So, like, now he seems like he's more open to it, but in the past, it's been something that he hasn't wanted to do. I think, too, the one thing that I did want to say is, like, we probably complained. I mean, I'm sure that we complained about it at the time, but, like, going back and looking, if they would have had this type of talent on the back end, like, with Keith Butler as DC and Terrell Austin as like kind of his assistant defensive backs coach or whatever, like that worked. Like, so, like, very well. They were at the top of the league in sacks, were taking the ball away a ton. And while we maybe got frustrated at times with the amount of yards that they gave up and stuff like that, they were bend, don't break. And they always were good at keeping teams out of the end zone. And today's game, that is really all that you can ask for. So I feel like we would, love to have that back. And I think that you can kind of get that back just in different roles where it's now TA as the defensive coordinator and somebody else that offers what Keith Butler did in terms of dialing up different types of pressures and working with the front seven as the senior defensive assistant, as opposed to the defensive coordinator, whether that's Antonio Pierce, whether that's Patrick Graham, whoever that might be being brought in that regard. You need to add to the staff. Like, this is exactly what we've talked about, whether it is the quality of coach or the number of coaches. That's something to me that falls back to Rooney in the pockets, because it's there. Like, there's no salary cap for the amount that you can spend on coaches, the amount of coaches that you can have. So absolutely something that needs to be done in that regard. That's one of the top priorities for me this offseason. As odd as that sounds when you think about all the free agents they have and all the issues that they have, because I think that is super important to getting the pressure numbers, getting TJ back to being TJ, and getting that front seven playing at a higher level, is bringing in somebody that's been there and done that with that group.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, unless there's a massive culture shift with the Steelers and they move to this offensive team, their defense is still their identity. Their defense is still what they play around. And so you want to get the most out of those players. And you mentioned the ownership and the Rooneys in the pockets. And that to me is what I was alluding to earlier. That to me is whenever you have this conversation, whenever you have a Tomlin conversation, any bigger picture conversation that you have involving the Steelers, I feel like you cannot avoid bringing up the Rooneys and the ownership and the impact that they have on some of the ways that this is outplaying for the Steelers. Like, having the smallest coaching staff in the NFL is nuts to me. Like, you have 19 personnel on your coaching staff. That is the smallest in the league. I feel like you should be willing to add at least a couple guys to your staff, a couple positions, to improve your roster and be able to get more out of your team. But this is why whenever I talk about Tomlin, whenever I talk about coordinators or just anything like bigger picture like this, I always have a peering eye on what ownership's impact is on it, because I feel like there's more than meets the eye when it comes to the impact that they have on this team. People just want to look at the coaching staff and the players. Ownership has a lot more to do with it than they think.
I mean, even from, I know that we've talked about, the Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett was a Rooney selection. Like, I know that we've talked, obviously Tomlin had to sign off on it and say that he thinks that the guy could work. But Rooney is on record saying that they didn't want the family to pass on another great pick quarterback, the way that, when his family was obviously been in charge for quite a while, when they passed on Dan Marino. So that was kind of the fallout of that. And even with Matt Canada, like, to my knowledge, Matt Canada was a Rooney thing as well. So, I mean, Tomlin obviously paid very handsomely to shoulder a lot of the blame, and I think should shoulder a lot of the blame. But at least with a couple of examples there, I don't know that he had much of, he had a say. I don't know how much of a say that he had. If you got ownership pushing for one thing, it's kind of hard to go against that, no matter the how long you've been tenured as the head coach. I've talked about the amount of turnover that I think can take place this offseason. I mean, let's start with the most important position. I think the last time we would have recorded, we were both thinking Russell Wilson, surefire, coming back on an extension. And even, a couple weeks ago, I probably would have said, I think Russ will be back, probably on a different contract. No, I said this on Steelers Saturday Sit Down for sure. I said I think that he'd be back on a different contract, probably, as opposed to like 3 years, 90+ million. You're looking at 1 year somewhere in the range of 15 million. Well, I'll be honest, based off everything that I've heard, based off the people that I've talked to, I don't expect him to be back. I think Justin Fields is going to be back as the starting quarterback.
That's actually surprising to me. I didn't think that you were going to say that. I thought you were just going to say that the contract is going to be more than you expected. I'm surprised by that, because I felt like the Steelers would almost insist on him being back, just because maybe this is a bad way to think about it. Like they don't want to be proven wrong that they chose the wrong quarterback. Because what kind of like look does that give if you bench the one guy and then you bring him back instead of the guy you benched him for? But I feel like it is a tough decision to make still. But for me, it's an easier decision going with the younger guy, going with a guy that you put training wheels on, so to speak, in the beginning of the year, and you still got to a 4-2 record with the training wheels on with Justin Fields. Like there was definitely at times where the offense looked very poor, very stagnant, but also there were moments where the offense had some flashes to it under Justin Fields. With me, I would bring back Justin Fields. That to me, even if he's a stopgap guy between now and whoever your next longer term pictured quarterback is going to be, I think that would be the better decision, because from what we saw from Russ, the decline that we saw from Russ over this 5-game losing streak, holding on to the ball, no awareness in the pocket, his feet were bad, and I just feel like his accuracy was down. It just seemed like he almost fell off a total cliff than what he was in the month of November, and I feel like that's hard to come back from, especially losing 4 games in a row in the regular season to end the regular season, then losing to the Ravens in the first round of the playoffs. I just think that is a tough road to come back from as a quarterback. And if what you're saying is true and they do go with Justin Fields, that would be pleasant news to me, because that's the decision that I would make.
Yeah, so you can't operate with hindsight. They got to be thinking about the present and the future when making this decision. But to me, man, would it look bad for the way that they handled 2024 if they ultimately end up going with Justin Fields going forward, because you should have handled him differently when he played. You know, you said with the training wheels, they handled him with kid gloves. Very, I thought easy to tell that was the case. I think some people were like kind of pushing back when I said that, saying that they didn't feel that was the case. I mean, certainly to me, it felt like they were operating as if he was a backup quarterback, doing backup quarterback game plans out there. The one thing that I think that he's got to be given credit for was cutting down the turnovers. I mean, he did not turn the football over, which has plagued him, quite honestly, even in his time at Ohio State. But certainly his time in Chicago as well. So give him credit there for sure. But yeah, I think it would just bring into question the entire handling of Justin Fields in 2024 if they bring him back in 2025. And I'm not saying that that's not a reason. That's a reason to not do it, because I have a take on this, and I'm curious to get your opinion. I said I would just go with the cheaper option of the two, because I want to. I don't know that I have one so much higher than the other where it's making a difference in the results of the football team. I would rather have the money to spend elsewhere on the football team to improve the roster potentially for the next guy. So not even really thinking about what this player, whether it's Justin, whether it's Russ, whether it's whoever else as an external candidate might be. I'm just thinking about the future and setting up the next quarterback to be in the best possible spot.
I understand that thinking. The question I have, though, is, or not even really a question, it's just an uncertainty, is like, when is that quarterback coming, and where is he coming from?
Right.
Like, is that? Well,
I think you got to get aggressive in 26.
Yeah,
like even if you're not picking high,
it come from so you're just saying it comes from the draft.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with, like, it's hard to imagine. You never know what's going to happen with quarterbacks in other places, right? But, like,
right,
you know, like a wild scenario that's been talked about right now is, say Deion does get the job in Dallas. They put all their chips in the Shedeur Sanders basket because Deion's there. What happens with Dak? Like, is that an option that you would get super aggressive for? Is he good enough to move the needle for your football? I think so. I think Dak's a top 10 quarterback. So, like, to me, that would be, but I'm saying next. So I don't know who that guy could potentially be next year, where the team's like, even a case this year. And I'm not saying that this guy's like a needle mover or anything like that, but I've kind of viewed this as the best case scenario for them is if Seattle decides to move on from Geno Smith, because I know despite at his age, before this year, he had made 2 consecutive Pro Bowls, and say what you want about the Pro Bowl, but like looked at the numbers, very legitimate Pro Bowler was Geno Smith the last couple of seasons before this year. Took a little bit of a step back this year, mainly due to red zone turnovers. Don't know what was going on. Like, it just seems like he went brain dead at moments in the red zone for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, 26 is when I think you start to get aggressive for quarterback. To answer your question, I was going off a little bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the question I had, is because, like, I agree with that sense if that's your thinking. Like if you know in 2026 you are going to make a move for a quarterback, even though you don't know who it is going to be yet, then take the cheaper option. And I don't know necessarily whichever one you choose, whether it is Justin or Russell, that it necessarily changed like the win total all that much. Like you saw what Justin was able to do, you saw what Russ was able to do. I don't think that they're that far off. I think they just operate different. And so ultimately the decision I don't think is going to be like that different as far as the outlook on the entire team. Now, the way the offense operates, I hope it would look a ton different if Justin is the full-on starting quarterback. I hope that they build the offense to operate around him instead of him operating a Russell Wilson offense. But I just think that no matter who they bring back, I don't think that if it's Russ or if it's Justin, my outlook on 2025 as a season is not going to be changed all that much.
I want to get your opinion on something, and this is kind of like, again, more bigger picture, and it's beyond just this one thought. But I have a take about the Steelers 2024 offense. I think if isolated, the pieces could have worked in different situations. What I mean by that is I think Arthur Smith is a capable NFL offensive coordinator in the right situation with the right quarterback, with the right pieces, right offensive line. I think Russell Wilson potentially still could work. He could still get average quarterback play out of him if he had an elite offensive coordinator, better playmakers than what the Steelers had to offer, and certainly a better offensive line because Russ holding the ball a lot, that ain't going to work with these specifically these tackles that the Steelers were deploying this year. The playmakers, despite them not being very good, I think if you have an elite offensive coordinator and or elite quarterback, you can certainly get away with that. And we've seen teams be able to scheme even not having elite offensive lines. I think to me, it starts in the trenches. That's kind of like what you have to go very far, but certainly they could have gotten further than they were if they had a better offensive line. But with the offensive line they have, I think they could scheme around it in a lot of different places. Just when you have all those things in conjunction with each other, average offensive coordinator, average or below average quarterback play, certainly below average playmakers, below average offensive line. What was the expectation for this offense going to be? Like, how good could they have possibly been with all those ingredients in conjunction with each other? Not very good. So my take is that maybe isolated, a lot of these pieces for the Steelers offense could have worked, but in 2024, with them all working together, this thing was dead on arrival. They had no shot to be a good unit.
Yeah, and I feel like people probably have to look past their own hindsight and look at what we were talking about before the season even started. And the way that we were getting to the Steelers winning, like in our predictions, for example, like I had them at 12-5, which I got to say at some point in the season didn't look like a crazy scenario to have. And I believe you had them at 10-7. Prior
10-7 losing the wild card. Yep.
I feel like those predictions, we got there not because we thought the offense was going to be average, but we thought that the defense was going to be top 5 and the offense would just hang around to do enough. And so you look at what happened and what played out. Was the defense top 5? I mean, they had moments, but ultimately not necessarily top 5 unit overall. And then the offense, the expectation, what we had preseason is pretty much what we saw play out with both quarterbacks. You saw some good flashes at times, but overall it was a mediocre offense that was laid out with a bunch of moving parts that are not really good parts to have as a whole. And I think that's
they overachieved.
That's the problem they have. Yeah.
They overachieved for a while and then got exposed against Philly, and then it was downhill.
They did overachieve for a while. And I think that, like, would you say that this season kind of in its own way mimics a little bit of that 2020 season where the Steelers started 11-0 and all the hype was around the Steelers, and then they had to fall off, and then they lose in the wild card to the Browns, a divisional rival. I feel like 2024 fairly similar. Like, we didn't go 11-0, but going into like late November, we're talking about the Steelers are a serious contender. They need to be looked at as an AFC championship team. And I'm not saying we, just the two of us, but I'm saying in general, the consensus talking points. And then you have the fall off, you lose to a divisional rival in the wild card round. It's almost like mirroring each other from 4 years ago.
There's certainly some smoke and mirrors, I think. But like, to me, the biggest thing was like this team was always what they were to me, despite what the record said. I know that you're generalizing with the fan base, so I get it, but like just giving my opinion of it, they never were anything that I didn't think that they were, that I thought that they weren't anything that I didn't say they were before.
They were never anything that you didn't think they were.
Yeah, sorry, I'm bad with words sometimes, but I never really put them into that true contender status. Now, at 10-3, did I start to think maybe they'll win a playoff game because I think that they could host one if they win the division? Sure. Like, so maybe expectation changed a little bit from that perspective, but
Especially
I never
looking
looked
at
at
the
them
teams
as
that
like,
they would have been playing too, because you already beat the Broncos, you already beat the Chargers. Like there was that leaves some that left some possibilities where you've seen that play out before earlier in the season. But
so I think
I agree with you though. I don't think that we ever really looked at the Steelers as that big of a contender, if any at all. And I feel like you just gotta be honest with yourself when you look at the team. Like the offensive roster specifically is just not very good. And if you really look at it, you really put on your glasses and stare at that thing, it's gonna burn a hole in your retina for how bad they actually probably should have been.
I mean, how many guys from this offense could you drop in another situation and they even make the 53, like, or play on game days, at least in a role that the Steelers had them in? Most of them, they ain't even making the cut. Smitty from around the 412 here. And while I may not have much hair, the hair that I do have will not be cut by anybody besides Keek at Keek's Barbershop. My friend Christian Circle, been with us since day one. Keek's Barbershop, located 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Download the app, The Cut. Book an appointment with Christian today, or you can do walk-in with Tony or Ashley. But again, Keek's Barbershop, 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Go check them out. Old school vibe in there. Absolutely love it. Cannot recommend them enough. Wouldn't go anywhere else. Maybe I'll see you there. Alan had some interesting perspective on this because his thought was the mental toll that the losing streak took on them more than anything else is what was the demise for the team. You know, say that the stretch of games that they had at the end of the year was spread out or placed differently. If they play them at the beginning of the year, they're more spread out and they lose them. Finish 10-7 still, but it's in like a different way. Maybe they end the season on like a 2-game win streak or something like that, as opposed to the way that it went down. Maybe it doesn't look the way that it does. And I'm not saying that they win a playoff game or anything like that, but like, to me, more so than the results, it's most disappointing how it looked. Because, man, I couldn't even get through the tape of that playoff game without getting pissed because of the effort that I saw on the defensive side of the ball. There were too many guys that were just along for the ride. I don't know if they already had like flights booked for their vacations or what, but there were way too many passengers to me at the end of the season, specifically on the back end of this defense, that just didn't look like they wanted to play. And that's the most frustrating part about it when you have what's supposed to be a really good unit, because on the flip side, there was never once where I questioned the effort of anybody on the offensive side of the ball. They're just not very good. On the defensive side of the ball, that's supposed to be where you got your breadwinners. Like, that's where you're supposed to make your mark as a team, is on the defensive side of the ball. And there were way too many guys, and some guys that have been, staples for this franchise and are supposed to be cornerstones, that wanted no part in playing in that playoff game by the looks of it, which is very disheartening.
I mean, what did I say on Steelers Saturday sit down? Like, the losing culture will breed more losing. And when you're on that losing streak, that is going to not bring a lot of confidence to your locker room. And I don't care.
And see, that's another thing that Tomlin's supposed to stop, though, right? So, like, if we're even losing guys,
that is a discredit to your head coach. Like, if you want to talk about criticisms of Tomlin, there are several to be had. That is one of them. And when you look at the way the season played out, if they would have finished 10-7 and lost in the wild card game, but instead of losing 4 games in a row to end the season, those losses were scattered throughout the season, I feel like I would feel a little bit different. But having the season end the way it did is probably the most disappointing thing that could have happened, because of just the absolute downfall and then seeing how it affected the players in the playoff game. Like, you're in a playoff game against a divisional rival, and you're having to question the effort of these players, which we never like to do. But it just seemed like there wasn't a lot of heart. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit really said it best on his broadcast, and he was calling out the Steelers wholeheartedly, that there's just no effort from their side of the ball. And it was frustrating as a fan to watch. But I can't say I'm all that surprised whenever you have the skid that you did to end the season. And I thought that going into the game that losing 4 games in a row could affect the way that they go into that game and the mentality of the team. It just would not be a fun environment to be in. And I know that a lot of people are probably going to sit here and say that like they're professional athletes and they need to like basically just like grow up and get over it. But I don't think whether you're a professional athlete or you're a high school athlete, losing like that is going to affect you mentally.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly tough. That's what, what separates these teams, though. Like, that's part of why they're not still playing, right? Like, I mean, that's the biggest separator from them. Well, on like a player for player basis, at least on the defensive side of the ball, the Steelers should be up there with anybody in the NFL, but they're not. What's the reason that that's the case? The effort that they put forth on a game like Saturday. All right. Last thing that I want to touch on before we get out of here. And I want to do like basically an entire episode within the coming weeks, as we're going to have a long off season, obviously, where we still will be doing Steelers podcasts. I'll do like an entire episode where we're kind of doing like predictions, what we think is going to play out. I think it'd even be fun if we did like dueling mock off seasons. Like, how would you kind of go about the 2025 off season? So that could be kind of fun if we do that. But I just wanted to put some takes out there. I already said I think Justin Fields is the quarterback that they bring back. There's just a couple other things that have been on my mind, just because I don't want to be late to the party. None of these would happen before the season ends, obviously, so we don't have to worry about it happening before next week. But I just want to get ahead of this before it becomes like too common. I don't know that this isn't even a hot take now. Enough people have said it. I think George Pickens gets traded. I don't think he's on the roster next season. I think they're going to basically completely revamp that wide receiver room. You got Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson is the only 2 wide receivers that would be under contract next year. I mean, like I said, I want to do a mock off season, but like to me, I think they spend in free agency on a wide receiver or trade for one. Man, it would be cool if I don't know how the New York thing's going to play out, but say Aaron Rodgers does go back, Devontae Adams does remain there. Garrett Wilson, I think, could definitely be had if that's the case. And I'm shooting for the stars there if that happens. But anyway, I think Pat Myers fired. I think they go in a different direction with the offensive line, or not retained. I don't know if his contract's up, because I've seen some dueling stuff on that as well. Terrell Austin, I think, is back. But I do think that they have to add a senior defensive assistant, and I hope that happens. Was anything else on my mind immediately about this team? I don't want to give any draft takes yet. TJ Watt's just signed an extension, hopefully sooner rather than later, because Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons could both sign extensions this offseason as well. I would like to be at the front of that line in terms of the number and not wait that one out to see what those two get. Yeah, that might be it for right now. Somebody asked me what's a surprise thing that could happen this offseason. Isaac Seumalo retiring. I don't think enough people have given that much thought. I think it's possible. Not saying it's going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did.
I like that. I actually agree with a lot of what you just said. George Pickens, we kind of made our mark on after that Dallas Cowboys game of how we felt about Pickens.
Oh, I thought you were going to say on a Saturday sit down, when I said the next game that they lose will be the last game that he plays as a Steeler. And you were like, well, what if they don't lose? What if they go on a run to the Super Bowl? Yeah, I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. If that happens, I'm not sure how it plays out. But they lose in the wild card round. He actually played pretty well, and I think the effort was there from start to finish.
I said 150.
Yeah. I mean, he played well. I don't know if they had 150 passing yards, and they did have over 100 passing yards, but yeah, I don't think that they want to go down this road with him. Somebody asked me, like with the most laid out all the paths, right, that are because he could be extended this offseason. So is it like the team trading him before we even get to that point? Is it them trying to not give him an extension this year and wait it out so then he forces their hand and he requests a trade? Or do they give him an extension? I'll tell you right, they are not giving him an extension. Like, that is the least possible of all the outcomes here with George Pickens this offseason. That one is not happening. They'll either trade him, or they're going to play out this final year and see how it goes and hope that for whatever reason things finally click for him in year 4. in terms of everything, not just the play on the field, obviously. I think he's a great talent. I will never deny that. I just know that there are a lot of people in that organization that are sick of him. And I don't know that they want to go down this path with him. He's certainly not getting $120 million from them this year. So the extension, don't even bother wasting time thinking about it. That ain't happening. I think he's traded, and I think he'll be traded for a 3rd-round pick.
I mean, I wouldn't really complain about that compensation for him, especially with the feeling of how we have. The one that you did bring up that I do really agree with, I think Pat Meyer would not be retained / fired. Like I said, technically same thing, but also not the same thing legally. So,
well, we've talked about the Steelers not wanting to pay 2 coaches at the same spot. So if he was under contract for 2025, maybe it's a bit dicier how we feel, but like, right. I think
that would change. But if his contract is expiring, then I think he's gone, and I think that that's a right move to do. I think that development or lack of that you've seen from some of these guys, I feel like that's a problem. I look to Broderick Jones. I feel like everybody looks to Broderick Jones in that sense, and maybe Broderick Jones just never pans out. But I would rather bring in another offensive line coach to find that out than have to stick with the same thing that we've already been rolling with and see if somebody else can get the most out of Broderick Jones while they still can.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let us know what you guys think about that in the comments, of course, as we always want. Leave some questions there as well. We're going to have a ton of time on our hands this offseason to answer a bunch of questions, probably do some Q&A episodes within there as well. Right above Tyler right now, the logo for Marcelo Electric, our friend Brandon Marcelo, a.k.a. Boots, started his own electrical company, which I will need. I don't know if you guys heard, but I got a house now. So next month, once I move in and stuff, might need some help from him. Thankfully, he does service the Beaver County area, as I found out a couple weeks ago when naming all the areas, and I left out Beaver.
I think that was our last Steelers show.
Was it really?
Yeah. Our last Steelers show. He services Allegheny, Butler, Lawrence, and Beaver County.
Yeah. That's funny. Anyways,
maybe that's why we didn't record for a month. You just had to recover from the embarrassment.
If you guys are wondering why we haven't been here, that's why. Anyway, shout out to Boots. Hit him up if you need work and are in one of those counties, Beaver, Allegheny, Lawrence, or Butler, residential, commercial. He can help you out. So hit him up. Him or his brother, Joe. They work together. As well, check out the links in the description of the show. Man, it still feels weird not having that GoFundMe link there. But the good news, this Saturday, live stream for Rocking Around the 412 prizes. Finally, getting around to it on what will be that'll be the 18th. So finally on January 18th, we're announcing the winners of all the prizes for Rocking Around the 412. So don't miss it. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss it, and you will know when we go live. But anyways, the links that are down there, get one of our pieces of merch, hoodie, t-shirt, long sleeve, whatever, everything custom designs. Our friend Haley Wagner's small business, whether it's our design or your design, she can put it on any piece of merch. Tumblers, a lot of different stuff that she's got going on over there. Get something for Valentine's Day for a loved one. Game Changers link down there as well. Save $10 using code AT412. I wouldn't necessarily say it's short season, especially in Western PA, but if you want some shorts from our friends over at DC40 Customs, go down there, or around the 412 shorts are down there as well. Other than that, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you are here on YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. If you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, just search Around the 412. You will find us over there, just like you'll find us on all of your social media platforms, except for Blue Sky. Don't know if I'll ever make one of those. Don't know if it's worth it at this point, but we'll see in the future. And we will see you next week right here on the Around the 412 Steelers show. Until then, for Tyler, for Smitty, we'll see you. Bye-bye.